What did that one teacher do to you that you'll never forget? My physics teacher in high school hosted an annual trip to Walt Disney World in Orlando for 15 to 20 kids for over a week. I was one of the better and most interested students in his class. He was an incredible teacher who found examples in physics everywhere. He also used to work for Disney prior to teaching. Since my family was not so well off and I could not afford the trip to Walt Disney World, I declined when he asked me if I was going to join. He probed a bit and he somehow found the funds to have me join without me even inquiring. I don't know if he pulled school money or there was a surplus. But either way, that was one of my best memories from that school. I still keep in touch with him 15 years later. At my high school, we had an annual week-long science trip, fully paid for by fundraising. Only 4 people were selected to go each year. My sophomore year, I was chosen. I knew there was no way I was going to be allowed to go. I had never been out of the state, never been on a single vacation, never been on a plane and never been away from home for more than 24 hours. My parents were incredibly conservative and immediately said no. I had a science teacher who just didn't accept the no. Instead of just giving up and selecting someone else, he called and tried to convince my parents. When that didn't work, he came to my house and had dinner with my family to convince my dad that I would be an asset and he would be doing me a disservice by not letting me go. He sat and ate my mom's terrible cooking and talked to my parents for over 2 hours until he got a "will think about it." Then he just kept following up. I had never had someone in my corner like that before, who was willing to go to bat for me like that. He wore them down and it was the best week of my teenage life. I'd never seen the ocean. 20 years later and I can still recall every detail of that trip. It was a major pivot point for me. In high school, one of my teachers had this duckbill whistle literally shaped like a duck's bill and it made a quacking noise. She used it to get the class attention. One time I guess we were being extra rowdy and she blew the ever-loving speak out of it and the class went stone dead quiet. She got this shocked look on her face, and then took her hairpin out and dropped it and the whole class heard it hit the ground and she got this big grin on her face and we all just busted out laughing. Haha. She must have been pleased with herself. I faked my way through 4th and 5th grade math. I never understood how to do long division, but managed to hide that from the teachers and answer test questions by reverse multiplication, basically guess a number and multiply it out and see how close I would get, and keep doing it until I got the answer. My 6th grade math teacher figured out that I was faking, and had no idea how to actually divide anything. She had me come in one afternoon to help with cleaning the erasers. All the kids fought for this privilege, so I was thrilled. Sat me down and tutored me until I grasped the concept. Bless you, Mrs. Gillespie. Basically guess a number and multiply it out and see how close I would get, and keep doing it until I got the answer. That's not faking, you discovered binary search, LOL. I mean, their guesses weren't necessarily in the middle of any set of numbers. It's the same idea as binary search. But if I just showed someone a process where I guessed randomly and kept correcting it, they wouldn't call that binary search. Made us make paper cranes for hall passes. 20 years later I can still make a top-notch crane. The professor I had for my Calculus 100 class in university was awesome. He was a good teacher and funny and engaging. If it was a first-year class with over 100 people in it, I was just a face in a big crowd. I was on campus after hours a couple years after I graduated. They run programs for kids in the evenings and was dropping off my oldest and I saw him. He stopped, looked at me hard, and said first name last name. Not a bad student. Not great. But definitely not bad. and kept walking. This was a good 6 years after I graduated. Absolutely amazed he would have remembered me at all after teaching how many hundreds of students in between. That is just crazy. I had the opposite with my high school band director. When I was a senior in high school, I was walking down the hall with 2 of my friends who were also in band. At this point, I had been in band with this teacher for almost 4 years. Saw him every day, and had one-on-one auditions and regular individual performance exams with him. He saw us walking by and greeted us, "Hey John." "Hey Jennifer." "Hey." Drawing a complete blank on my name. I didn't take it too personally. He was really nice, but he was one of those people who was really focused on the music to the exclusion of everything else and was kind of flaky. I wouldn't be surprised if he identified us all in his head by our instruments and the sound of our playing first and faces and names a distant second. When I was in 7th grade, there was a teacher at my school that was essentially a love child of Santa and an elf. Dude was 5 feet 2 inches. Over 300 pounds. And had a beard that would put Gimli to shame. My first ever conversation with this man ended with him saying, "Now you go get yourself something to eat." Big man. Speep caught me so off guard. I didn't realize what he had said until after I walked away. 3rd grade Mrs. Jones. My dad had just deserted us and we were suddenly destitute. She bought my school pictures for us and paid my lunch bill all year. She never said a word about it. Only found out later. Bless her. In 5th grade I had this teacher who was very gruff. Most of us didn't like her because she was such a hard ass. Like military style with discipline and homework completion. She wasn't mean. But she wasn't nice either. Then I found out my parents were getting a divorce. I showed up to school one day visibly upset. Kinda shaky. And had obviously been crying. She basically grunt rasped decidedly undecided. Hallway. Now. I was so not in the mood to be scolded and I knew I was a mess. I stomped out into the hallway. She told me she knew what was happening at home. Asked me if I was okay. Then listened to me sob and break down about how I felt. She gave me a hug and asked if I wanted to spend an hour or so in the library since she knew I loved books and then I could ground myself. It was so unexpectedly kind. I will never forget it. I found out later she was so gruff and short with us because she'd been teaching for a long ass time and kids are mean. She had some sort of health condition that left her in pain most of the time and she had to use a cane which caused her to punch a bit. Over the years all the meanness of the kids made her a little hard and cold. But she really did care about her students. I called somebody stupid once when they got a question wrong and the teacher instantly made me stand up and spell stupid backwards. Got it wrong with the pressure and learned a lesson that day. Told me I was smart and could succeed. I had spent the past couple years at a private school, trying so hard to prove myself. Despite doing well academically, I didn't fit their cookie-cutter mold. So I was looked down on by other students and administration. When I told the guidance counselor that I wanted to be pre-med and go to medical school after college, she pretty much told to lower my expectations because I wouldn't succeed. At the end of my college math class my senior year of high school, I ended up in my professor's office to look at what I had missed on my final. He told me that I had done well, and that I could my PhD in math if I wanted. That was not what I wanted to do. But when I told him I wanted to be pre-med, he looked at me and said, "You're going to well in that. I know you will succeed." 6 years later and I'm halfway through my second year of medical school. And his words still ring in my mind. Not me. My brother. He had one of those haircuts that was popular in the mid-90s where you have long fringe maybe 5 but skinhead the rest. He was a skateboarder. Anyway, the woodshop teacher decided that the haircut was an health and safety hazard and swiftly cut his hair in front of the whole class, meanwhile berating him kids today etc. etc. My brother was 12 and came home from school crying. My father was less than pleased, and apparently went up to school and made a right kerfuffle, as he should. My mother was very embarrassed by it all. I'll never forget. My re-teacher tried to keep me behind for no reason. I'm a complete goody two-shoes, and he gave me my first ever detention for asking my friend about what textbook page we were reading after coming to class late following an appointment. The guy tried to make me pick bits of paper and rubber bands off the floor as he watched me do it. I walked out, with zero consequences. Wish I did that. I got detention because some other kids started rummaging around in my pockets. And my teacher said he'd talk to me about it after school. He didn't, and I wasted an hour of my life in a classroom. In my senior year, my English teacher asked me if I was manic depressive after turning in a personal essay, only for me to get diagnosed with bipolar disorder a week later. How can they diagnose a person from a paper? I know people who are told they are schizophrenic have the best painting that are so unusual. The paper was supposed to be about a turning point in our lives, so I wrote about my psychotic depression, which was followed by psychotic mania. My diagnosis before was depression, and I knew about the symptoms of bipolar disorder, but I didn't connect the dots until she said something. She's an older lady, so maybe she has had someone close to her that has bipolar and saw similarities. She didn't say she thought I had it. She just asked if I was already diagnosed. It sounds like she was actually trying to help. So I'll take that as a good thing. When I was in 3rd grade, the teacher of my gifted program class, extra class, we were pulled from mainstream to do a few hours a week, started berating me over raising my hand too quickly to answer questions, saying I needed to think longer and give others the chance to answer. She went on and on about how I had an attitude. I got upset and she made me stand in front of the class when I started to cry. I know you're crying and I don't care. It was my birthday. It was a class of about 8 students. One guy told me in high school that that day was one of his clearest memories from elementary school. One of my most vivid memories of high school is of an old bitch of an English teacher mocking a fellow student's nervous stammer as she did her presentation in front of the class. When the student started crying, that old bitch mocked her crying, then failed her for not completing the presentation, because she was crying. We used to joke that we hoped that old dried up bitch would drop dead in front of the class. I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I hope your subsequent birthdays have rocked. Oh boy. Grade 3. I said crap, when I got tagged out. Rounding second. During a game of soccer baseball, Canadian term for kickball. A little girl covering the base screamed, "Teacher." Negotiation fair said the C word. So I got put on detention and yelled at for the rest of the day until I finally snapped on my teacher at the end of the day and said, "Listen, teacher, I don't get it." All I said was crap when she caught the ball, and I didn't even know that that was a swear word. The teacher replied, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I thought you said the other C word." I said, "What is the other C word?" She said, "Ask your mother." At the end of the day, I got into the van and told my mom what happened. She broke out laughing her ass off and explained to me. When I asked that the word the teacher thought I had said was cunt, I went to school the next day and said to all my friends, "Hey guys, guess what word I just learned?" Had a high school art teacher who would let me stay in his classroom during lunches. Always gave me half his sandwich and other extra food because he knew I didn't eat much otherwise. Undefined. Sweet. My band teacher drove me home several times after the 7 p.m. jazz band practice. My dad was supposed to pick me up, but several times he fell asleep and didn't answer the phone when I tried to call. Had the police come to the school because he had reason to believe I was smoking cigarettes and using drugs in 7th grade? No. Both of my parents smoked in the house. I didn't even know I smelled like cigarettes until the police told me why they were searching my backpack, desk and locker. WTF? What country do you live in that they'd send the police to check if a kid is smoking cigarettes? Either your law enforcement is being misused or there is no crime where you're from and they have nothing better to do, lol. She took every phone call no matter the time of night while I was in rehab. If it wasn't for her being there in my lowest time, I probably would not be here today. You should let her know that, if you haven't already. I tell her every time I speak to her. I can't remember what I did, but in 1st grade my teacher got mad at me and said, "You wanna act like a baby? Fine, come over here." She made me sit in a corner on the floor and gave me 2 little toys to play with. That must have been nice. And embarrassing. This teacher was extremely strict, hated by my class, but loved me because I was one of the few who respected her and did well in her class. When school ended, she gave me a crystal bear. Nothing too fancy or expensive, but I felt as if I was glowing leaving that classroom with bear in my hand. I still have it and will treasure it forever. You know, usually a strict teacher is a whole lot more nice when people follow the rules. Honestly, I was so tired of hearing all the other kids in my grade whine and talk speep about our teachers while blatantly disrespecting them and giving them a hard time. Not doing work, not studying for a test, and then saying the teacher sucks at their job. Trying to be a smart ass every time the teacher asks them a question. When the teachers treat me fine, I got called a teacher's pet, or was accused of having an inappropriate relationship with the teacher. But really the teacher is just doing their job and I'm doing what a student is supposed to do. It's really not that hard. While I don't doubt that some nasty teachers really do exist, I'm positive like 90% of them are actually pretty decent if you just followed the rules and did the work. Had 10 minutes to spare before lunch bell and he told us all to go jerk off or whatever it is you do. I don't know what he wanted to say and he apologized to us, but it was funny as hell. Undefined. Probably just a funny dude who let his real personality come through too much for the job. Absolutely. We had a good laugh. I feel like before cameras and cell phone recording became ubiquitous, more teachers would go off track and be unprofessional, but that when it was obviously a joke or an accident, classes would just have a chuckle and move on with their day. I still remember the day my really chill communications teacher was told for the 5th year in a row that he wasn't guaranteed to get another contract for the fall despite being the only teacher in the whole school that could actually teach it, which he did all 5 periods of the day, despite that meaning he had no lunch or prep/marking time in school. This was in the late 90s and we had super VHS cameras with Amigas with video toasters for editing. It was fantastic equipment for students to have access to, and it was not common for high schools at the time to have that kind of course at all, let alone a teacher that would know anything about it. The dude was breaking his back because he loved the course and the students, but found out just before class one day that he still wouldn't be hired full-time or even be guaranteed work despite the courses already being full for after the summer. He came in a couple minutes late and just kinda lost it and went on a 5-minute rant at the Board of Education, complete with swearing, throwing a piece of chalk at the floor and putting his head down on his desk at the end. Almost crying. We just told him that sounded like Bull's Peep and that we thought he did a great job and really liked him. Word never got out what happened as we kept it quiet. Today I feel like someone would have started recording it and he would have been fired, which would have been a shame cause he was a great teacher just having a really bad day. I feel like with the threat of being recorded at any moment has really ratcheted up the fear of losing your career over things that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. Should a teacher swear in front of a class? No. Does it really matter that teenagers heard a bad word one day? No. Undefined. Yes, exactly. Well put and great example. I remember teachers having an off day and go on tangents and rant in class, of course. Was always after there was a rapport and dynamic in class established into the semester. Those moments were not only memorable because of the novelty and intensity, they were educational in a real-world sense. Whether it was us setting them off after being asses and reaching their patience on a bad day for them, or something pushing them to limits in their life, it was a learning experience. You got a glimpse of them being human and fallible as an authority. You got some empathy and people skills hammered into you at an age where it is developing. It was real, along with some adult real-world lessons of conflict/failure and interpersonal politics. It led to respect, empathy and avoiding mistakes by an elder who learned the hard lesson in a changing world. Also, when the day is over and they return stoic back to business, you learn by osmosis how to be adult and get your act together and just move on. It was in my high school. My chemistry teacher. I was a bright student, especially in chemistry. When my grades went down, my parents only bashed me, whereas my sir understood it was due to my mental health issues and literally talked to me and calmed me down. It felt so good. I felt like somebody legit cared and understood me then. My family only cared about my grades, obviously. Undefined. Also, thanks for the silver, kind stranger. I was anorexic when I was in school. She took me aside after class and told me that if I didn't stop doing what I was doing to myself, I was going to die. That my body was going to start shutting down. My organs would fail. That it would not be beautiful and I was going to die an awful and painful death. I still catch myself slipping back into that mindset 10 years later sometimes. But I will never forget that. She saved my life. Called my mum while she was at work to tell her I'd written one of the best things he'd ever seen as a teacher. I wrote a term paper in psychology class and got an A. The following year my GF had the same class and the teacher passed around a copy of my term paper as an example of what he expected. A rubric. That was a great feeling. My 7th grade language arts teacher asked if she could read the story I had written out loud to the class. I loved writing and that was the greatest confidence boost I could have gotten. Senior year of high school. I was on the wrestling team and I had cut about 30 pounds that year. From 170 down to 140. I happened to have the same math teacher 3 years in a row, so we really got to know each other. First name basis and all that. She knew how much weight I cut for the season. I told her and it was obvious just from my face. I wasn't fat before my cut either. I had a six-pack. She had a strict no eating in class policy. That'll be important in a minute. The day after the wrestling season ends, I walk into math class and sit down. She walks over to my desk and puts a whole apple pie right in front of me. She knew it was my favorite. Handed me a fork. And said she'll ignore the no eating rule for one day. I finished that whole pie in maybe 30 minutes. Linda. I'll never forget that. You absolutely made my day. I have always loved learning and loved going to school. I was a good kid and never really got into trouble. One year my parents got called in for a parent-teacher conference. One by one, each of my teachers told my parents that I acted out during class, was a distraction, etc. This came as a surprise to my parents as I had never gotten in trouble. And my grades were always good. Finally, the conversation got to my history teacher and my science teacher. They were speechless. My history teacher told my parents that he wished he had a classroom full of students with a passion for learning like me, and that if the other teachers put in as much effort into teaching as I did into learning, then there would not be an issue. My science teacher agreed and apologized for wasting my parents' time. The rest of the school year was interesting. I could tell there was tension between certain groups of my teachers. My history teacher would later become the principal of that school, and I could not think of anyone more deserving of that role. He knew my home life wasn't the best. He saw a bright kid but someone who struggled with no following orders. He wrote home as I was failing and spoke more kindly about me than most had ever done. It was very nice. Freshman English teacher in college. He had a last name with 2 capital letters in it. So something like McConnor. On the top of one of my first papers I wrote McConnor, and he told me that I spelled his name incorrectly. Now obviously this confused me because the spelling was indeed correct, and it took a few minutes of back and forth confusion before he told me what I did wrong. Like a typical 18-year-old, I kind of just shrugged it off. Like, who the beep cares? His response was essentially, if you don't care enough about your writing to get it correct, why the hell should somebody else care enough to read it? The response hit pretty close to home. Not initially, of course, because I was an 18-year-old speephead. But now, 15 years later, I still think about it from time to time, and it does force me to put more effort into many of the things that I do. Accidentally left paperwork on my desk that showed government grade projections based on family income, which meant I should have failed the class, knowing full well it would trigger me to make sure I got the best grade in the entire school year. Every other teacher told me how smart I was and how well I could do if I applied myself. This sob knew that was not the way to make me work, haha. I broke up with my boyfriend the night before my final, and as I was walking to class to take it, my teacher, seeing me, told me that I could take it the following day with his afternoon class without me even saying a word. He was a really great teacher. Wow. Teachers do that? Well, it was a college teacher. He was banging the boyfriend. He gave the B, F, the D, and the op an A. There was the pretty old economy teacher who always talked about his fishing trips, who gave me an extra point for drawing a dead Kennedy's logo on my test. Then there was the history teacher who turned out to be a pedophile, who I had a whole conversation with about fur coats. And the art teacher who was literally always pregnant and still is, according to my friends who still go to that school. How many kids does she have now? My teacher told me she was proud of me and that I have my own opinions and that she hopes I succeed in the future. I had a geography teacher that used to be a pretty good athlete when he was younger. His specialty was the 400-meter sprint. But the last time he ran seriously was like 15 years ago. And he was now in his late 30s. One day, it was unusually hot. It was like a heat wave in early June. And geography was our last class of the day. And we just had gym class on top of that. We were asking to go easy on his class as we were tired and had low concentration, as we were in the last grade of high school and us adults. We kinda could speak to the teacher like that. One of the kids got the idea to hold a race on the schoolyard. Fastest kid in our class, a very talented football player that was about to be pro. And he now actually is. VS the geography teacher ex-athlete. If the kid wins, we can go home early. Teacher agreed. Guess what? The teacher beeping wrecked him. He was wearing jeans, dress shoes and a shirt, and beeping beat the semi-professional athlete in sneakers, t-shirt and shorts. It was an unbelievable sight. The teacher was gasping for air and panting during the whole class afterwards. But man, did he win gloriously. Dude was mad quick. I had a similar situation, well, at least in regards to a bet with a teacher. It was also the last class of the day. We had a test in this class the next day. Well, our teacher, also the baseball coach, liked to do test review outside in the quad. Somehow a bet was formed: if the baseball player could throw a rock and hit the big tree by the woods, we could do the test as class-wide group discussion type deal. But if the teacher could throw the rock and hit the tree, we'd take it normally. Each person was allowed one throw and the student had to throw first. Student threw first and barely hit it. We got excited. Teacher picked up a rock, walked over to the tree and tossed it and hit it. If you're going to make a bet with someone, make sure you're going to win. Teacher, who then reiterated the words used in the bet and the loopholes that ensured his win. We were all idiots and never said they couldn't get closer to the tree. Senior year, I was placed in a freshman typing class. Everyone else was chatty and goofed off. But I wanted to learn to type. So I really put in a lot of effort. I only had 2 classes in the morning. And the rest of the day I was a waitress. As I was pretty much on my own in my senior year. I got called into work on the day of our class final. So I went to work and missed the final. When I showed up to class the next day, I apologized to the teacher for missing the final. He asked me, "Do you want to know the grade you got?" When I replied yes, he said, "I gave you an A because if you had been here, that's what you would have gotten." I never forgot that. Thank you, Mr. Wyatt. Undefined. Edit 2. I'm beyond thrilled at the awards. Yeah, all rock. Wow. That's a different kind of teacher. Called my handwriting a chicken speep. I was never the same again. That's actually kind of funny. I remember one teacher called out a boy and asked him if he was writing with his hand or his foot. Poor guy. I once had a kid who had handwriting so bad that I just put all the work for his class online. I couldn't decipher his handwriting. So I basically said, "Beep it. No one writes in here anymore." I make sure to be the first teacher to check out a laptop card for the semester. I had just gotten out of an emotionally abusive relationship around 16 and was worried about my ex hurting herself. Abuse really beeps up your mind. So I confided in my English teacher. He listened to what I had to say and express. Then secretly got in touch with my parents, school administration, and her school's administration to make sure we were both okay. My parents told me about this about a year after graduation. I was really taken back by the fact that he did all of that to make sure we were okay. I'm Facebook friends with the teacher and want to buy him a beer once COVID is under control. He made me write with my right hand. They did the same to me. Nobody told me until years later, which kinda explains why I could never play golf or baseball. Is golf and baseball for left-hand people? Nah, just that swing motion always felt super awkward and unnatural, and I suspect it's because I started as a lefty. Also possible that I'm just bad at those sports. 5th grade. Teacher was shaking with anger because I put my math problems horizontally instead of vertically. Or something really stupid like that. She snapped at me for not being able to follow simple directions and humiliated me. When she went to look at the paper of the boy next to me, he said, "I did it the same way." She smiled fondly and said, "Oh, Robert," as if she was amused. Bitch. Do some people just get off on being literal cartoon villains? I'll never understand this behavior.